Hey guys, this is Eckhart Slaughter. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars gaming video, and today we'll be discussing my recent experiences with Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Now, before I continue, as always when I do these type of videos, I want to just make it clear that I was flown out to an event by EA. I am one of their game changers, and just generally they treat us really well. So although I go out of my way to make sure I don't let bias or anything affect how I talk about a game, I still think it's important that you guys know all the details, especially where video games are so expensive. I really don't want you guys spending your money on something you ultimately don't like. Anyway, I had played Fallen Order back at E3, but just this week I got to play 3 hours of the campaign, and although this wasn't a totally final build, it was pretty close to complete. I just think there were a few bugs left in the game. So I'll be showing you guys some footage while I'm talking. This isn't stuff that I captured myself, it's B-roll that they provided us, but it is generally representative of what we did. So here's the plan for today. I want to ramble a bit, talk about my thoughts on the game. I want to compare it specifically to The Force Unleashed because that's the connection that a lot of people are making, and I also want to address some common questions that I got. So, Fallen Order. It's a pretty standard action-adventure game. If you guys have watched the previews, you'll basically know what you're going to get. You play as Cal Kestis, who was out on an adventure, which I can't really talk about right now, and I think it's better for you guys to experience yourself anyway. Regardless, he's got a crew, he's got a ship, and he can travel freely to several planets across the galaxy. During our playthrough, there were 4 planets in total, but only 3 that we could visit at the time. One was named Zepho, which is new to Star Wars canon, the other was Kashyyyk, and the third, most interestingly, was Dathomir. Now, Kashyyyk was only unlocked after you went to Zepho, which is the planet I went to first, but interestingly, you could actually choose to do either Zepho or Dathomir first. However, at the event, they warned us that Dathomir will be very, very difficult and really highly suggested that we do Zepho first, and that's what I did. The game, by the way, and this is the first thing I really want to talk about, is actually really difficult. Alex, or Star Wars Explained, chose to go to Dathomir after Zepho instead of Kashyyyk, and he had to leave because he was just getting his butt kicked, and I heard something similar from other people. I've heard the term Souls-like or similar to Dark Souls being thrown around a lot in reference to this game, and before the event I kind of actually wrote it off as a way of saying that the game will be hard, but it's actually a lot more than that, and in a pretty fun way. And this is the first real way I want to sort of compare and contrast this game with The Force Unleashed and The Force Unleashed 2, which were really our last true single-player only Star Wars games. Whereas The Force Unleashed and The Force Unleashed 2 are relatively linear, straightforward campaigns, this is anything but. Not only can you choose to go to the different planets, each of which sort of operates like a hub world, but on those planets themselves, progression isn't really linear. You've got to sort of battle your way through enemies to find certain objectives. You have to do backtracking, moving to new areas that you unlock with new force powers or new droid abilities, all while relying heavily on the minimap, but also looking for secrets, bits of lore, etc, etc. I've only beat Dark Souls 2, but I've played several of the Souls games, and one of the aspects of them is a campfire mode. Basically, you rest, you can level up, you save your progress, and they operate as a checkpoint. Basically, you're looking for that campfire because if you get killed, then you might have to travel a lot of distance again. Fallen Order has almost the exact same system. They're not campfires, but rather rest points. When you go there, you can level up, your health is recharged, and you get 2 new stim packs, which you can't replenish in any other way, and you save your progress. However, just like Dark Souls, when you save at one of these points, all of the enemies respawn. So if you want to get from point A to point B, those points being campfires, you can't just clear out half the enemies, go back to your camp and heal, because they'll have just returned. I mean, sure, you get a shot at it again, but ultimately you have to use your skill and do it all in one go. What's more, if you're killed by an enemy, you lose all of the experience that you've accumulated. It's a pretty basic system. You gain experience, which gives you level up points, which are used to further unlock and power up your character. Sometimes it's like pay 1 point and get more force power or HP, or get a new basic move. But other times it's like save up 2 points points and unlock a new arm of this tree. So you have to sort of play cautiously, because saving up those points means you risk losing experience. However, if you are killed by an enemy, so long as you damage them on your next life, you can get your experience back, which is also a Souls feature. So you've got the planets which operate as mini levels. There are different routes to go through, different secrets are unlocked as you gain more force powers. There will definitely be reasons for backtracking and exploration, but as I said, you can also tackle the planets in a different order, giving you, well, a degree of freedom. The locations were fairly different. Mild spoilers here, but on Zepho, you go into the ruins of an ancient civilization. You fight an advanced droid automata, which I thought was really cool. Kashyyyk is obviously Kashyyyk, and Dathomir I think will be incredibly interesting. Hopefully we go from not just basic ruins and backwater planets, but maybe to a city or major imperial base at some point. That would be cool. One thing that was neat about Kashyyyk is that when you fly in, the planet is actually blockaded by Star Destroyers, which I thought personally was a nice little detail. The next thing I want to talk about though is combat, and to me this is where the game is markedly better than The Force Unleashed. Although you're a much more powerful Jedi in The Force Unleashed, I found the combat to be a bit, well, mind-numbing at times, especially as you get more powerful Force abilities. The enemies just aren't really very challenging. This is also problematic because you're basically fighting the same enemies throughout the entire game. In Fallen Order, however, I've said this in my prior video, but literally a couple of stormtroopers can kill you. I started the game on the Jedi Master difficulty, which is, I believe, the second or third hardest, but I had to actually move it down at the end of the first planet because I was just getting my butt kicked too much and I wanted to get as much stuff seen as I could during my limited time. But even on normal, the game is difficult, and changing the slider not only changes how much damage you take, but also how aggressive the enemies are, how perfect you have to be with your parries and your dodges, and I guess just the amount of pressure that you feel. Deflecting a blaster bolt, for example, and engaging ranged enemies isn't simple, especially when you've got enemies of different types attacking you at the same time. Yeah, Storm and Scout Troopers can be killed in one hit if you do so properly. However, frequently I found myself overwhelmed and struggling to deal with groups of enemies, especially where you have pretty limited force powers and stamina. For most battles, you can use maybe, at least early on, a force push and maybe a force freeze, then you're done, and basically relying on your lightsaber combat and your deflections. So the game is incredibly skill-based, and even basic interactions may cause you to struggle or die. In the 3 hours I played, some on Master, some on Regular, I probably died near 10 times, and I was wondering whether I made it far in the game, and one of the devs actually came up to me and said that of about 100 people, I made it the farthest. So you should expect to die, and you should expect a pretty punishing experience. It's very thoughtful in that you can't just slash at enemies, but you've got to look for weak points, you've got to use your dodge and your parry abilities, and you've got to use the Force in creative ways. One thing that I did accidentally, I didn't even mean to, is I was being shot at by a rocket trooper, so I used my Force ability to hold him and his missile in place, then forced pushed it into a group of enemies. It was something that I wasn't even sure whether I could do, but that felt really rewarding. I think there will be lots of interaction and nuance that you can learn, especially as the game progresses and you unlock new powers. When it comes to unlock, some of them are just you can strike farther with your combos, but others are completely new Force abilities. One allows you to do a little Force sprint and slash, another makes your Force push more powerful. I think you get the idea. I was asked sometime if combat was similar to the Batman Arkham games, and I wouldn't say that's a great comparison. There is a lock-on feature where you can sort of take on enemies one by one, but one thing I noticed is that if you parry or dodge an attack, unlike the Batman games, the other enemies don't stand back. They're very aggressive, and as Cal, you have to be the aggressor rather than in Batman, where much of the system is using your counters. One thing that I was surprised at, and which I suppose is Souls-like, is the amount of enemy variety, because that was one thing I was worried about too. We saw several different Stormtrooper variants. Off the top of my head, I can think of a couple of elite Stormtrooper types, basically just regular Stormtroopers, but with better AI and weapons. There were Scout Troopers, there were Scout Troopers armed with melee weapons, there were Flame Troopers, there were Heavy Weapon Troopers, there were AT-ST pilots, and I'm sure I'm missing some, and that's just what we saw on one planet. But aside from that, there were probably also maybe a dozen forms of wildlife that you could attack, and on Zepho we also had the ancient droid automatons, which were pretty cool, and surely an enemy that will be seen in just one area. It's very important in a game like this, which can be pretty basic, that you keep things fresh with new enemies. So I'm glad that each world will probably have its own native wildlife and enemies. I think Dathomir will have some witches, Night Sisters, Night Brothers, maybe even Rancors, who knows. Aside from that, you'll also be responsible for fighting the Inquisitors, including, we know, at least the Ninth Sister and surely the Second Sister as well. So there'll be a lot to do there. One thing I didn't like though, and I guess this is sort of on topic, is the on-rails sections. We saw with the Kashyyyk demo at E3 that there was that bit where he steals the AT-AT, and I didn't really find that very fun. It was very, very linear, and I'm sure there'll be a few of those in the game, but I guess at this point in sort of modern age of gaming, it's kind of inescapable. Moving on though, I want to talk about customization, and one thing they've said specifically is that there are no microtransactions. You pay for the game and you get it. When I was playing, I think I unlocked 3 different outfits for Cal and several lightsaber pieces. The way the lightsaber works is really interesting. You can change not only the blade, but also the color and material of the hilt and each individual component, so you can make a pretty customizable blade. For outfits, I don't think you can customize each individual part of Cal's outfit, but I must have saw at least a couple of dozen, and they're not just recolors either. They're actually different clothing, so that's pretty cool. I don't know whether we'll get as ridiculous as we did in The Force Unleashed. Well, I know we won't, and that is a little bit of a downer, but I guess that's just the way things are now. Aside from that, you can also customize the appearance of the Mantis, which is the ship they fly. It's kind of funny, you find things in like boxes around the map, and you see your droid go in and come out with a new color scheme for the Mantis or a new outfit. It's obviously not realistic, but it's just pretty funny and interesting from a gaming standpoint. Certainly I don't think you'll have any problem finding new parts for your lightsaber or whatever else. If you are a completionist too, the mini-map, which is pretty complete and very detailed, actually shows you how many treasures and how many secrets are left in each area. And one thing I'm going to say is I suggest for people who like really hardcore games to just not use the mini-map, because it very clearly says where you can and can't go, and I think some of that is more fun on your own, especially with the exploration. I don't know whether that's an option in the full game. You can probably turn it off just like you can freely change the difficulty, but I don't know. It's also a little unclear to me how side missions work, especially because the worlds are fairly expansive. I went on a pretty linear mission in that I went from point A to point B and back, but I'm sure the maps must have some side missions built in. Regarding length though, we played for probably 3.5 hours, and I know some people didn't even finish the first planet. I finished the first one and got maybe 40 minutes into Kashyyyk, but I have a feeling this will be a fairly long game. They said nothing about total length, and that's something that they would just refuse to even hint at, but if I were to just guess and wildly speculate, I would say that there will be maybe 8 to 10 planets with a runtime of maybe 25 hours, but again, that's all up in the air. I do think it will be a fairly long game because we had basically just started the story. Nothing major had happened and we were, well, 4 planets in. On to some first, I guess, very light negatives. The first is that, well, the game isn't groundbreaking. It doesn't change anything fundamentally about the action-adventure game genre, besides from maybe the way it integrates Dark Souls stuff into a less hardcore game, at least on normal difficulties. That's interesting, but again, I don't think it's really going to be a fundamentally new game for the genre. I don't find that typically necessary, especially where the game is really fun and I've been wishing I could play it now. That's a good sign to me. I do also think graphical fidelity is not necessarily up there. There were a couple of poor animations, which made a little bit of the platforming stuff kind of frustrating, and some of the textures on things like fire or the Wookiees wasn't really incredible, but also not bad for a 2019 video game. It's not like it's really bad, it's just not really great either. There was a part where you like fly under a Star Destroyer, and the model looked worse than the Battlefront 2 one. In one of the boss fights, there was also a 2D fire. Again, you're probably not really supposed to see that from the angle that we did, but just a little thing that I noticed. Some of the platforming sections can also be a little bit annoying. There's parts where you have to go down like an ice slide and jump on a rope, and I missed a few times. Thankfully, if you do go off ledge, you don't go back to the last campfire, you just lose a portion of your health, but that can still be punishing, especially where there is quite some distance difference between some of the checkpoints. And I did die really close to checkpoints a couple of times, and it was frustrating, but I guess sometimes that's what you want in a video game as well. There were also puzzles, some that use the Force, maybe like the classic Jedi Knight games, but not as difficult. There was one in the ruins that took a few of us some time to figure out, and the devs actually came over and helped some people just to like speed it along. So if you're not into puzzles, you might find that frustrating, but I believe if you struggle long enough, you can click down on the D-pad or something and your droid will help you out. So there you go. If you guys have any questions though, I've been doing a sort of quasi AMA over on the Fallen Order subreddit and also on my Twitter. I'll link both of those down in the description. The last thing I want to mention, which I meant to bring up earlier, was the lore of the game, and it actually is pretty crazy how seriously this game is tying into other media, especially like the Darth Vader comics with the Inquisitorius. The Ninth Sister, for example, has a robot leg like she should, and there seems to be a pretty large database. Your droid can scan enemies, the environment, just different context clues, lots of stuff like that. So lore junkies like myself should have a pretty good time. Just to summarize though, as this title says, at least if I keep the title I'm planning, I do think this game will be significantly better than The Force Unleashed. I enjoy combat a lot more. I'm not sure if the story will be as good because I really have no idea what's going to happen. I think the game will also be significantly longer, it will have more replayability, and I just think it might be the Star Wars single player game we need right now. However, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think based on the footage that I showed and my commentary. If you have any questions, you can tweet them at me, let me know in that Reddit thread, or just leave them down below. That's all for now though. Until next time guys, have a great day and may the Force be with you.